So let's start with extroverted sensing. I always like starting
we've
with it.
called this here at Personality Hacker sensation.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about the sensory world in a rich way.
Yep.
Particularly the sensory world in this moment. Like all the physical senses I can see, touch, taste, smell, hear, my physical body, the impressions, also the feelings inside my body of hunger, being tuned into all of the sensory things that are happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the past sensory experience, but right now, the sensory moment. And it's single perspective minded. It's not really taking into other perspectives. It's focused on the here and now with a single viewpoint in all of this.
Yep.
So let's talk about that function we call sensation. How does it show up, analytic or holistic based on that understanding of the function?
Yeah, I would add 2 words of presence and experience.
Yes.
Right. So it's a function that is very present in the moment, very tuned into the environment, it's extroverted. So it's very aware of what's going on around it. And it has a hunger for experience, right? Wanting to have experiences. Now, the word experience is vague and abstract, and there's a gajillion different kinds of experiences. And so I think that's one of the reasons why the oversimplification of this function, which is rife amongst type communities, I think that's it's important to remember that experiences are varied and vast. And as varied and vast as experiences are, so is this function.
Yeah.
So the 2 different kinds, we're going to pare it down. We're going to marry extroverted sensing or sensation with an analytic energy and a holistic energy and look at how it's a slightly different function depending upon which orientation it's associated with. So extroverted sensing or sensation, when it has an analytic bent, this is the stereotype of Dario calls it the mover, right? It's a person who is asserting their energy and their experience into the outside world. It's more of the adrenaline version. It's the one that wants to go bungee jumping or go do fun, interesting things and get its heart rate up. It's the part of you that wants to not just have an experience, but have an experience.
A
right?
maximum experience.
You got it. It's a feeling of a maximum aliveness. And it loves the feeling of pushing the limits. I see this in our daughter. In early podcasts, we said that I thought she might have ENFP preferences, but that's just because she was doing that monkey see, monkey do thing. I'm pretty sure at this point she has ESFP preferences. It'd be very difficult for me to unsee that. And it's really fascinating to observe how often she just goes towards an aggressive physical activity. Like I'm performance.
Broadcasting her voice loudly. Articulating wild, really bombastic energy.
That's right. And lots of cartwheels and round-offs, right? Lots of climbing trees, lots of doing things that are probably like she's already been on the roof of our new house multiple times to a point where I see handprints on the outside of the windows in the 2nd story that I can't get to. She has, right? She's up there. And so it's like, I didn't even know she was there. I just see the evidence of the handprint at this point, right? And she's 11.
Yeah.
So this is the appetite for life. It's the joie de vivre. It's the desire to play in a big way. And so this is the version of extroverted sensing that I think a lot of people are more tapped into. But it can also be, like promoting a new show or landing a deal or anything that gets your heart racing. It helped me understand why my dad, who had ESTP preferences, loved marketing and sales. He loved walking in, making a deal, getting as good a deal as humanly possible, and then walking out of the room like acting like it was no big deal. But he loved it. It just got his blood going,
First responders, special ops in the military, people that really want to apply this sensation function in a deliberate, intentional way often are this analytic version.
Yeah. And Dario talks about it. I mean, like he gives a story of like a friend who has this function, who they were going to cross a street and there was a policeman who was directing traffic up to a median. And the ISFP friend just like jaywalked up to the policeman at the median and looked at him and was like, "Hey, how you doing?" And then continued jaywalking. It was like, it's kind of this like, throw caution at the wind, go take direct action, right? See what you can get away with. and have this sort of joie de vivre about it the entire time.
Yeah.
So that's the more analytic version. The holistic version is the one that and I see this function being described more as the analytic version than the holistic version, even in Myers-Briggs circles. But I do know that Myers-Briggs, at the point of origin, described extroverted sensing a little bit more as the holistic version. And the holistic version, again, remember, it's like a more receptive energy. It's taking in more context. It's less assertive. So this is more about pleasure, right? This is more about the sensory experiences of life. It's less about jumping out of a plane or landing the deal, or walking up to a policeman and jaywalking and being like, "Hey, how you doing?" and keeping going. Like, it's less of that attitude, and it's more like the experience of putting your feet in the sand, or going to a club and listening to thumping music and being a part of that, right? It's more about just being in the vibe of life.
Dario draws a contrast with that idea of pleasure against comfort. So he draws a contrast between pleasure and comfort. And he says it's actually not about comfort. It is truly about pleasure. And that's a distinction he makes. And I think that's an important distinction to make here, because it's easy to think in terms of, that more receptive, holistic pleasure. I immediately think, comfort, warm blankets, sitting by the fire with a cup of coffee,
right,
that kind of thing. But that's not, that can be pleasurable, but there is still like a sensation or I guess an immediate moment of pleasure that's happening in the here and now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, pleasure is more stimulating, right? Yeah. Comfort is less stimulating. It's more kind of like, it's more passive. Pleasure is more heading towards something, even if it's a slow amble towards it. And he gave an example in his new book about like somebody who might just want to go experience all the pleasure of, like, say, slowly traveling through Thailand for a while and experiencing the jungle and the beaches and the clubs. And it's about absorbing all of the experiences, surfing, watching the sunset, dropping in on a party, dancing, drumming, maybe smoking some ganja, right? It's like the whole thing, right? Just experiencing all of it. Yeah. And there's a fun, relaxed feeling towards it.
Yeah.
So the people who have this function that tend more towards like all the sensory experiences of food, the foodies, or the ones who just like kicking with friends and drinking a beer on the beach and watching the sunset as they're talking to their friends. Like, I don't think people realize that extroverted sensing and the holistic version can love long, fun, interesting conversations just as much as anybody else can. Because we get this idea that SP types want to be more action oriented. They don't like to sit around and talk. They want to go do. But the holistic version of this, the sensate version, loves an experience like that. So it's more of the absorbing the pleasures of life as opposed to getting the big max aliveness moments out of life.
Yeah, I would also think that maybe this person that's more holistic in nature would be more likely to watch extreme sports, let's say, than go do the extreme. They're still interested in the extroverted sensing or sensation, like, the person that's jumping off the cliff with like the parachute and going down, but they prefer to watch like a simulation of it or watch it than do it themselves necessarily. They're still interested in that kind of activity, the max aliveness activity, but they want to do it more in a receptive or passive way.
Like vicarious.
Yeah, vicariously.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they wouldn't ever do something like that. It just means that's more natural to them to watch it happen than do it themselves potentially.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And the holistic sensate version is going to be more likely to be the ones who are into, I don't know, like stylish. Yeah. They're more likely going to be the good dancers, right? I remember a very controversial political figure and the arguments that people had about their type. And one of the types that was on the table was ESTP. And they're elderly as well, but they are not a particularly good dancer. And I remember somebody going, well, they can't be an ESTP because they're not a good dancer. I was like, well, I suspect that if they have extroverted sensing or sensation, it's probably the analytic version, right? They're a politician. So they might be one-sided that direction and be kind of a terrible dancer, actually. And the idea that an ESP type could be a terrible dancer is like, well, they've been more focused on all the max aliveness stuff, not the sensate parts.
I think I have the same image of the person in your mind without naming them, and I'm pretty certain this person is one-sided. I would argue. I don't think anyone, even fans of this person, would have probably agreed that they're fairly one-sided.
Probably. So it's regardless of what this individual's personality type is, understanding analytic versus holistic alchemical reactions to the functions means that some of the stereotypes in our minds might not be accurate. Like all ESP types are good dancers. That might not be accurate. Most ESPs will be, because most of them will have access to both the analytic and the holistic.
Yeah.
But if they're one-sided, they won't, right? And so you might have an ESP type, again, that's a holistic user that would never in a million gajillion years ever say, get on a fast motorcycle and go do something, that feels really dangerous. They might never do that. And again, remember, it's harder for a holistic version to become an analytic version.
Yeah.
So they might go, well, I must not be an ESP type. I must be an ENP type because I prefer to sit around and talk with my friends than I do, jumping out of a helicopter onto a black diamond, and skiing all the way down or something. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily the only example. The willingness to do something, the desire to do something like that isn't the only symbol of an extroverted sensing user.
Yeah.
So if you enjoy sitting around talking with friends, that could still be that extroverted sensing or sensation. Yeah. And I suspect that there are quite a few, particularly ESFPs, but some ESTPs too, that are very interested in type, that are holistic users and believe they have ENP preferences. And my other suspicion is that holistic people who have a preference for holistic extroverted sensing or sensation as one of their first two functions are probably more into type than the analytic users. Yeah. That's my suspicion.
Yeah.
I don't know that to be true, but I suspect that.
Or there's more of them.
Yeah, exactly. And we probably train people out of being the analytic version because those are the ones who can't sit still in class.
Yeah.
Right? So we might have like a disproportionately high number of holistic users. So, because at least in this country, because we get trained out of it. So I think that that's a really good understanding of those two functions, or like an awareness that function can be split into those two styles. And I think the other part of it is all of us have extroverted sensing or sensation inside of us.
Somewhere.
And so if it's not one of our first two functions, do we have a preference for one or the other? And can the other side teach us something?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.